Ladies and gentlemen, seekers of light and secret knowledge wherever you may be, you are listening to Points of Light Radio, the podcast dedicated to taking you past the apron and behind the closed doors of lodges everywhere. And here is your host, Stan Miller.
Greetings, brothers and sisters. Shalom. Assalamu alaikum. It's a pleasure to be back with you here on Points of Light Radio. And in this segment of Points of Light Radio, you are going to view a two-part segment. To begin with, we will be discussing the Freemasons. Now, you saw me interview members of the Freemasons and their appendant bodies here on Points of Light Radio before. They really don't need a whole lot of introduction, okay? Some really brief insight. Freemasonry traces its origins back to the local guilds of stonemasons, right, as far back as the 14th century. The traditional craft lodges or blue lodges work 3 degrees. Entered apprentice, fellow craft, and master mason. To join, one must believe in the supreme being, or as they call it, grand architect of the universe. Right? And the first guest you will see here on Points of Light Radio is a gentleman named Ian Robertson. It's part of a much larger interview I did with him, so you will see more of him later on in Points of Light Radio. But Mr. Robertson is a Freemason in Scotland, and he sheds some light on Masonic history. And he also tries to separate, Masonic tradition from Masonic historical fact. Right? You will also see another guest I featured previously on Points of Light Radio, the November 25th, 2022 segment to be exact. And this gentleman's name was Will Wilkinson. He is a member of the ancient and illustrious order of the Protestant Knights of Malta, David's Chosen Few, number 21 in Campden, Antrim, UK. Mr. Wilkinson disputed the traditionally held historical views between Orangeism and Freemasonry. So after viewing this, I'll allow you, the listener and viewer, to decide for yourself how you feel or where the Freemasons and their degree system originated from, right? As I said, this should be interesting. As I always ask you, are you still thirsty for knowledge? Are you still searching for the light? Well, then you just trim your lamp and you follow me. Mr. Robertson, welcome to Points of Light Radio.
Yeah, at last. Apologies for my extremely busy schedule of late. It has been a bit crazy, to be honest.
Not a problem. So you were a member of the Incorporated Trades of Edinburgh.
Absolutely. Yep.
Tell me a little bit about yourself then.
Okay. Are we kind of started here, or
we're started here? We're started here.
Right. Okay. A little bit about myself. Now, just to check, Stan, you are a kind of Masonic.
We are a fraternal podcast. We are a fraternal podcast.
Excellent. Right. Well, I am both a Freemason.
Okay.
And also a member of the Incorporated Trades.
Okay.
And to say a little bit about that, the ancient trades existed before Freemasonry did. And as we know, although not clearly, from our Masonic histories, what once were operatives evolved probably in the 17th century, but really exploded in the 18th century into what we've described as speculative, philosophical Masons as opposed to operative Masons.
Yeah. So they evolved more like we have more into what we see today, is what you're saying.
Well, it's an interesting one for me because I see two parallel organisations developing. It's a theory on my part, because to actually pin it down and prove it, good luck on that front if anybody can actually do it.
Okay.
Did Freemasonry start with the building of the pyramids? Perhaps not. although those earlier influences were certainly picked up by really clever and creative people who really got into symbolism and metaphor. Similarly, with the medieval cathedral builders, were they the first Freemasons, or have we adopted those traditions and claimed their history? I really like the fact that here in Scotland, the Grand Lodge of Scotland has a group that's called the History and Heritage Group.
Okay.
And I love the fact that they call it History and Heritage, because sometimes we claim history when in actual fact it's heritage of those earlier groups that went before. So in my humble opinion, looking back at the past through the eyes of Freemasons is the wrong way around. We need to look at what was happening in the Middle Ages and glean from it what has influenced what we now call the craft of Freemasonry. And there's many things that have influenced us. And as I take you through, I've got a bit of a presentation here. I can maybe better illustrate some of that. The rise and falls of different groups, and where one group goes into descendants, another group goes into ascendants. And we're probably at a very interesting point in time in that, where are we now as an organisation worldwide? I think the figure is still quoted that Freemasonry worldwide is about 6 million. Is it really, or are we declining? So, 21st century, I think, has lots and lots of questions about where we are, where we've come from, but most importantly, where we are and where we go next. Mm-hmm. We claim to be an enlightened society, an enlightened organisation. Are we as enlightened as we need to be in the 21st century? It's just a question I'll put out there.
Well, what I am noticing is fraternalism is getting big, not just Freemasonry, but it's getting big in the developing world, like the Philippines.
Oh, yep.
It's huge, but it seems to be, at least here in North America, is declining a little bit. I can't speak for the United Kingdom or Europe.
Well, I think certainly in terms of the States, I know a lot of brethren in the States. One of the various hats that I wear is I represent the Societas Rosicruciana in Scotia. Sadly, I couldn't make the conference this year in Kentucky, but the SRICF have a wonderful conference every year in November, and the feedback to me was it was yet again another triumph, another wonderful few days in Louisville, Kentucky. So many branches of Freemasonry. We kind of know, just I suppose to put it all into context. I am Scottish. I make no apology for that. I do believe that the major elements of what developed into Freemasonry came from Scotland, developed further in England and beyond, and in the 18th century went global for a variety of different reasons. But those 2 degrees, which were part of the operative system, you were either an apprentice or a journeyman. The title of overseer or master was more a managerial position. So it wasn't such degrees. It was grades. You were an apprentice until you were accomplished, and then you were a fully qualified craftsman. But there was a different status. We kind of know that the first Grand Lodge allegedly was 1717 in London, but that said, I say allegedly because there's no minutes that exist from 1717, so it's probably nearer 1721, 1723 that the Grand Lodge system as Freemasons begins to develop worldwide. We know the next Grand Lodge, 1725, Grand Lodge of Ireland, and then maybe slightly late in the UK, as it is now, the Grand Lodge of Scotland, 1736. Fascinating thing about that is that the St Clair Charters, so-called, they were actually 2 letters 1601, 1628 from or to the St. Clair family of Roslin. Pretty much it was letters from the operative trades, the Wrights and Masons, 1601, the Wrights, the Masons and Hammermen of Scotland, 1628, acknowledging them as patrons and protectors of their craft. So really they were looking for sort of like noble people of rank and influence to be their patrons. That has been distorted over time, and just Google it today and you'll see that the Sinclair family were the Grand Masters of Freemasonry from that point in time. It's a different quality that we're talking about here. Operative patrons, Freemasons. So there is much that we need to unmuddy in these very muddy waters of operative masonry, Freemasonry, and the transition from one to the other. Even that's not that clear. Involved as I am in the Incorporated Trades of Edinburgh, I used to think as a young, naive Freemason that once upon a time the operatives who built cathedrals, then they invited in speculative gentlemen masons, and then we became Freemasons. Until I realised that here in Edinburgh, the incorporation, i.e. the operative Masons and the Freemasons still exist, but apart. That split happened in the 18th century, but both organisations still exist. Something else just to throw in for your listeners. This whole notion that back in the Middle Ages, there were signs, tokens, and modes of recognising other Masons. I don't think so. I think that's very much a Freemasonic thing. And I'll give you the reason for it just now. You turn up day one, Stan, proclaiming to be a Mason, and even if you've got letters of, sort of like reference that you're a good guy and we should employ you in this building. If you started on day one and you were not a qualified Mason, you would be exposed within minutes. There is no need to sort of give each other handshakes and passwords. That, for me, is something that comes out of the development of Freemasonry after the Shaw Statutes, 1598, 1599. I gave a paper on this recently for Lord Sir Robert Murray. We know that William Shaw was interested in the art of memory, which is linked to Hermetic practices at the point back then. We don't know if he personally met Giordano Bruno, but we know many in his circle did. He travelled round about the various royal courts of Europe, and we're told, because of the kind of religious climate at the time, the political climate at the time, that he was flexible in his faith as he moved about the different royal courts of Europe. So he was a shrewd man. Anyway, had he known Giordano Bruno, he certainly knew of him. 1598, the first Shaw statue. 1599, the second Shaw statue. 1600, burnt at the stake for heresy, was Giordano Bruno. Gagged, naked, hung upside down, and burnt. This, might I say, was a time to be cautious. This was a time to cover your work and not share with people that you could not trust or did not know your secrets and interests in terms of where science, knowledge, religion was heading at that point in time. So my working theory is that is the origins of Freemasonry in the 17th century or throughout the 17th century, where we do have records of the first speculative Freemasons, but no detail of the ceremonies that they went through. That doesn't really happen until the end of the 17th century, when we have the first, what we can truly regard as a Masonic ritual that we would recognise elements of today. And that's the Edinburgh Register House manuscript of, I think it's 1696. So a fascinating period in the 17th century. in amongst all that as well, you have things like the witchcraft trials. So witchcraft, no, but alchemy, Rosicrucianism, Hermeticism, yeah, let's talk about that, but within very trusted circles.
I do want to ask you though about that. You said that the Knights of the Knights of Malta, disappeared. And it survived in the families of Scottish knights and may be the origins of Masonry. Now, you said that many Orange historians who are also Masons have promoted the idea that Orange degrees, rituals, and structures were borrowed from Masonry, and that many of its founders and members were Masons. But there is little or no evidence for this, and the issue is obscured. And the real question is, which is from where, and did Masonry find its degrees in symbolism and structure? So you're actually disagreeing with that, by the sounds of things, that they say Orangeism got its degree system from Masonry and things.
I think it takes us back to the Masonic order itself, and we need to challenge, I suppose, or have a conversation with them as to where they genuinely believe their degrees, symbolism, rituals derived from. And again, when we explore that issue, we do disappear into the mists of time. We realize that there are various influences on their structures, on their systems. And I certainly would throw out the challenge to Masonic historians, to Orange historians, that could we explore the possibility that many of these degrees originated in Scotland, and where how the Knights Hospitallers or Knights of Malta rituals and practices were preserved in that period after the death of Sir James Sandilands, when we know that the order was preserved within a number of families within Scotland, and certainly had an influence in the Scottish court in the early 1600s. And it's very obvious that it is difficult to tease out the origins, but there is clearly a central point, a central fountain from which much of this symbolism, structure, and ritual derived.
Well, there you have it, brothers and sisters. A Freemason and a member of another fraternal order, right, with their views on Freemasonry, right? What do you think about Masonic history? Where do they get their origins, right? Were they responsible for, shall we say, spawning other fraternal orders, which in some cases they were, but some of these more ancient fraternal orders, were they? Well, you be the judge. I personally, on a personal level, I feel that Freemasonry and other fraternal orders, not just the Orange, there was probably a lot of crossover, because let's be blunt, they were a member of each other's organizations, as my guest said there. But, like I keep saying, Freemasons, feel free to chime in with your opinion. I welcome it. But as I keep saying, one thing we must remember to do is separate historical traditions from historical facts, okay? How did you like Mr. Robertson? Right, and I will say this, as that was part of a much larger interview I did with him. Wait until you see that full interview. It was a great interview. Stay tuned. But brothers and sisters, it's been a pleasure fellowshipping with you today. As you can see in the details section, I'm not going to go into it like I always do, but you can see the various different ways of viewing and listening to Points of Light Radio. And until we meet again, just step into the light.